Have you ever wondered just how high is too high? For us humans. Today, we're exploring the absolute vertical limits of life on our planet, that invisible line in the sky where our bodies just can't function, and what that might mean for some of history's most incredible stories.
So let's just dive right in. What is that absolute vertical limit for life? Is there a point where our bodies literally just give up? Well, the answer is a big, fat yes. And it has a name that, honestly, couldn't be more fitting.
Meet the death zone. And no, that's not just for dramatic effect. It is a very real biological boundary that starts right around 26,000 feet up. Once you cross this line, your body's amazing ability to adapt to thin air, it just stops completely.
So what's actually happening to you in the death zone? Well, the oxygen pressure is so incredibly low that your lungs just can't pull enough of it in, and that sets off this catastrophic cascade failure in your body. Your cells stop repairing themselves, your digestive system just halts, and your brain starts to lose function. You are, quite literally, on borrowed time.
Okay, this whole death zone concept can feel a little abstract, right? So let's ground it. We're going to use two very famous mountains as anchor points to really put this altitude into perspective.
First up, we've got Mount Ararat. This is an absolutely massive peak, steeped in history, and it tops out at 16,854 feet. Now that is incredibly high for sure, but I want you to keep that number in your head as we look at our next anchor point. And now, the big one, Mount Everest, the roof of the world. At over 29,000 feet, its summit isn't just high, it's well inside that death zone we've been talking about.
Putting these two giants next to each other really makes it click. The difference in height between Ararat and Everest is more than 2 miles. And that gap isn't just a number. It's the difference between a grueling but survivable climb and stepping into an environment where your body is actively dying.
And this chart here just makes it crystal clear. See Mount Ararat. Its peak is comfortably below that red line, that death zone. But Everest, it completely shatters that ceiling by more than 3,000 feet. This is exactly what makes climbing Everest so unbelievably dangerous. That final part of the climb is a desperate race against your own body shutting down.
So, we've got our biological rules, and we've got our real-world mountains. Now this is where it gets really interesting. We're going to take a speculative leap and apply these hard limits to some of history's most famous stories.
Okay, let's play a what-if game. Imagine a vessel like the legendary Ark, floating on a global flood. If our biological rules about the death zone still apply, just how high could the water actually rise before life on board becomes impossible? The answer, well, it brings us right back to that same hard limit. The biological ceiling is 26,000 feet, period. If the floodwaters ever reached that altitude, every living thing on board would face the exact same fate as a modern-day climber on Everest: oxygen starvation and total system failure. The Ark simply could not float any higher and sustain life.
All right, for our next what-if, let's circle back to Mount Ararat. What if the legendary Tower of Babel was built right on its summit? How high could people possibly build before they ran into that same deadly altitude problem?
We've looked at real mountains, we've looked at legendary structures and vessels. Okay, now let's bring it all together and see how these different scenarios really stack up against each other.
And here it is, the whole picture in one shot. Look at Mount Ararat, way down there, well below the danger zone. Now look at our hypothetical Ark, floating right at that 26,000-foot ceiling. Any higher is a no-go for life. Then compare that to Everest, which pushes deep into the death zone. And finally, there's our Tower of Babel, starting on Ararat and stretching up, crossing that same fatal line. It's just a striking visual that puts our vertical limits in super sharp focus.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? I think it's that human life, our existence, operates within this incredibly narrow and fragile window. That 9,000-foot gap you see between the peak of Mount Ararat and the beginning of the death zone, that isn't just empty air. That's our entire buffer for survival. It's a pretty powerful reminder that no matter how high we try to build or how far we dream, in the end, we are all tied to the fundamental limits of our own biology.